It was a bright and sunny morning in downtown Chicago, the kind of day where everything seemed to sparkle. Even the cars lined up neatly inside Apex Motors' showroom. Marcus Johnson stepped through the automatic glass doors, his polished leather, shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor. He paused for a moment, taking in the gleaming vehicles around him. Rows of luxury sedans, sporty coupes, and family-friendly SUVs stretched out before him like a parade of possibilities. Marcus had always loved cars. Growing up, he'd spend hours flipping through car magazines, dreaming of owning one of these machines someday. Now, decades later, not only did he own dozens of them, but he also owned the entire chain of dealerships that sold them. Still, today wasn't about business, it was personal. His wife, Angela, had been hinting at needing something bigger since their youngest child started soccer practice, and Marcus figured it was time to upgrade. As he walked further into the showroom, his presence didn't go unnoticed. One of the salespeople, a man named Greg, glanced up from his conversation with a young couple nearby. Greg was in his late 40s, with thinning brown hair combed back and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. At first glance, he seemed friendly enough, but there was something guarded about him, as if he were sizing people up before deciding how much effort they were worth. Greg excused himself from the couple and turned toward Marcus. For a split second, his gaze flickered over Marcus's expensive suit, his gold wristwatch, and the confident way he carried himself. Then Greg's expression shifted ever so slightly, not quite frowning, but definitely not smiling anymore either. Without realizing it, Greg had already made up his mind about this customer based on nothing more than appearances. And what he saw didn't impress him. "Hey there," Greg said, his tone casual but lacking warmth. "Looking for something special?" Marcus nodded politely. "Yes, actually. I'm interested in a luxury vehicle, something reliable but high performance." Greg raised an eyebrow, though not in admiration. Instead, he crossed his arms loosely over his chest and gave Marcus a once-over again, slower this time. "High performance? Huh?" he replied, drawing out the words. "Well, we've got plenty of options here, but some of them can get pretty pricey." Marcus caught the subtle dig right away, the slight emphasis on the word pricey, the way Greg's mouth curled upward in a smirk. It wasn't outright hostility, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. Marcus had dealt with attitudes like this before, both in his personal life and during his rise to success. He knew how to handle it without losing his cool. So instead of reacting, he simply smiled and nodded. "I understand," Marcus said smoothly. "That's why I'm here, to explore my options. Maybe you could show me a few models?" Greg hesitated for a moment, clearly debating whether or not to take Marcus seriously. Finally, he shrugged and gestured vaguely toward the back of the showroom. "Sure thing," he said, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. "Follow me." As they moved between the rows of cars, Greg kept glancing sideways at Marcus, trying to figure him out. There was something about the way Marcus spoke, his calm demeanor, his choice of words, that didn't quite match the image Greg had formed in his head. But rather than question his assumptions, Greg doubled down on them. After all, he'd been working at this dealership for years, and he prided himself on being able to spot a serious buyer from a mile away. To him, Marcus looked like someone who might wander in off the street just to gawk at the fancy cars, not someone ready to make a purchase. They stopped in front of a modest sedan, its silver paint catching the light streaming in through the windows. Greg gestured toward it with a lazy wave of his hand. "This one's pretty popular," he said. "Good gas mileage, decent features, plus it's affordable." "Affordable?" Marcus almost laughed. This particular model was priced well below what most people would consider luxury. Clearly, Greg was steering him toward the cheaper end of the spectrum, assuming that Marcus wouldn't or couldn't spend more. But Marcus didn't let his amusement show. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, inspecting the car as if genuinely considering. It's nice," he said after a moment, "but I think I'm looking for something with a bit more power." Greg blinked, caught off guard by the comment. Power? Who was this guy kidding? Shaking his head inwardly, Greg decided to humor him. "All right then," he said, leading Marcus toward a slightly sportier model. How about this one? It's got a bit more oomph under the hood. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, running his fingers along the edge of the car's door. Not bad, he admitted, but I'm still not sure it's what I want. Do you have anything else? By now, Greg was starting to lose patience. Every suggestion he made was met with polite interest, but no commitment. It was like Marcus was deliberately stringing him along, wasting his time when he could be helping real customers. Frustration bubbled beneath Greg's surface, and it showed in the way his shoulders tensed and his jaw tightened. You know, Greg said finally, unable to keep the edge out of his voice, a lot of folks come in here thinking they need top-of-the-line stuff, but when it comes down to it, they end up going with something simpler. You might want to manage your expectations. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying Greg's face. There it was again. That thinly veiled condescension, the assumption that Marcus couldn't possibly afford anything better. Part of him wanted to call Greg out right then and there, to reveal who he really was and watch the color drain from the man's face. But Marcus resisted the urge. Instead, he decided to play along a little longer, curious to see just how far Greg would take things. Maybe you're right, Marcus said mildly, but I do appreciate your help. Let's keep looking. And so they continued, moving from car to car, each interaction growing more strained than the last. Greg's comments became increasingly sarcastic, his body language more dismissive. Meanwhile, Marcus remained unfazed, observing everything with quiet amusement. Little did Greg know, he was digging himself deeper and deeper into a hole. One that would soon become impossible to climb out of. Across the showroom, another employee watched the exchange with growing unease. Lisa, a young woman in her late 20s with curly blonde hair and sharp green eyes, recognized Marcus from corporate meetings she'd attended in the past. She wasn't entirely certain if it was really him, but the resemblance was striking. As she debated whether or not to step in, Greg's behavior grew worse, culminating in a remark that left even her cringing. You wouldn't understand half the tech in these cars anyway, Greg muttered, shaking his head. Why don't we stick to something basic? Lisa winced. That was crossing a line, even for Greg. She glanced around, wondering if anyone else had heard him. When she saw Marcus's expression remain calm and composed, she realized he was biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Whatever happened next, Lisa knew it wouldn't be pretty. The tension in the air was palpable now, thick, enough to cut with a knife. Greg, oblivious to the storm brewing, pressed on, determined to wrap up the encounter as quickly as possible. What he didn't realize was that his actions were about to change everything, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. Greg's patience was wearing thin. Each passing minute felt like an eternity as Marcus continued to ask questions about features, performance, and pricing. To Greg, it seemed like Marcus was deliberately prolonging the conversation, testing his limits. But what Greg failed to realize was that Marcus wasn't just asking questions. He was observing, analyzing, and quietly gathering evidence of the man's behavior. So, Greg said, leaning against the hood of a mid-range SUV, this one's got all the bells and whistles you could want. Backup camera, leather seats, even heated mirrors. Pretty fancy, right? Marcus nodded slowly, running his hand along the side of the vehicle. It's nice, he admitted, but I'm still not convinced it's the right fit for me. Greg sighed audibly, rolling his eyes before catching himself and trying to mask his frustration. Look, he said, crossing his arms tightly over his chest. I get it. You're looking for something top of the line, something flashy. But let's be realistic here. Cars like that don't come cheap. The implication was clear. Marcus couldn't afford it. Greg's tone carried a mix of condescension and thinly veiled mockery, as if he were speaking to someone who had no business dreaming big. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed, yet commanding, silently daring Greg to continue. Across the showroom, Lisa shifted uncomfortably where she stood. She'd been watching the entire exchange unfold, torn between stepping in and staying out of it. Something about Marcus felt familiar, his calm demeanor, his authoritative presence, but she couldn't quite place him. Still, she knew Greg's behavior was unacceptable, No customer deserved to be treated this way, regardless of their background or financial status. As Greg launched into another sarcastic comment, Lisa decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. Quietly, she approached the pair, forcing a cheerful smile onto her face. "Hi there," she chirped, addressing Marcus directly. "Is everything okay? Can I help with anything?" Marcus turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice smooth and polite. "But I'm fine for now." Lisa hesitated, glancing at Greg, who shot her a glare that clearly said, "Stay out of this." She took a step back, unsure of what to do next. Her instincts told her to intervene, but years of working under Greg's domineering leadership had taught her to tread carefully. For now, she settled for hovering nearby, ready to jump in if things escalated further. Back at the SUV, Greg was growing increasingly agitated. Every question Marcus asked seemed designed to push his buttons, forcing him to reveal more of his true colors. And reveal them he did, in snide remarks, dismissive gestures, and outright insults disguised as casual comments. "You know," Greg said, shaking his head as if talking to a child. "A lot of people think they need all these fancy gadgets, but honestly, most of them don't even know how to use them. They end up paying extra for stuff they'll never touch." Marcus tilted his head, studying Greg with mild curiosity. "That may be true," he replied evenly. "But I prefer to make my own decisions based on what I need, not what someone else thinks I should have." Greg bristled at the subtle jab, his face flushing red. "Well, sure," he muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "If you've got the money to burn, why not go all out? Just don't blame me when you realize you bit off more than you can chew." At this point, Lisa couldn't hold back a small gasp. Even for Greg, that was a low blow. She glanced around nervously, half expecting other customers to notice the tension building between the two men. Thankfully, the showroom remained relatively quiet, save for the occasional murmur from the young couple Greg had been helping earlier. Marcus, however, didn't flinch. If anything, his composure only grew more unshakable. He folded his arms loosely across his chest and fixed Greg with a steady gaze. "Tell me," he said, his tone deceptively casual, "do you treat all your customers this way, or am I special?" Greg blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. For a moment he looked genuinely confused, as if he hadn't realized how rude he'd been. Then, recovering quickly, he forced a laugh. "Hey, no offense meant," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "I'm just trying to give you honest advice, that's my job." "Honest advice?" Marcus echoed, his lips twitching into a faint smile. "Or assumptions based on appearances?" Greg froze, his mouth hanging, open slightly. He opened and closed it several times, struggling to find a response. Finally, he settled for a weak shrug. "Look, buddy, I'm just doing my job. If you're not interested in what I'm showing you, maybe you should try somewhere else." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus took a step closer, his height and presence suddenly making Greg seem smaller, less imposing. "Funny you should say that," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying a hint of steel beneath its calm surface. "Because I happen to own this dealership." For a split second, Greg stared at him blankly, uncomprehending. Then realization dawned, slow and horrifying. His eyes widened, his mouth dropped open, and his face turned pale. What?" he stammered, taking a step back involuntarily. Marcus reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. With deliberate slowness, he scrolled through his emails until he found the one he was looking for. An official message addressed to him personally, signed by the board of directors of Apex Motors. Holding the screen up for Greg to see, Marcus pointed to the sender's name. "Corporate headquarters." "This is me," Marcus said, his voice firm but controlled. "Marcus Johnson, CEO of Apex Motors. Does that sound familiar?" Greg's knees nearly buckled. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet as he tried to process what was happening. I didn't know," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I swear I didn't—" "That much is obvious," Marcus interrupted, cutting him off mid-sentence. And while ignorance might explain your behavior, it doesn't excuse it. By now, Lisa had moved closer, unable to tear her eyes away from the unfolding drama. She recognized the email signature on Marcus's phone and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Her heart sank as she watched Greg's face crumple under the weight of his mistake. "I'm so sorry," Greg blurted out, panic rising in his voice. "I didn't mean any disrespect, I was just what?" Marcus asked sharply, though his tone remained measured. "Following your instincts? Making assumptions? Or treating me like I didn't belong here because of how I look?" Greg opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he stood there, frozen, his face burning with shame. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then turned to Lisa, who looked equally uncomfortable. "Could you please fetch the manager?" Marcus asked, his voice softer now but still commanding. "I think we need to discuss this matter further." Lisa nodded quickly, grateful for the opportunity to escape the awkward tension. "Of course," she said, hurrying away toward the office at the back of the showroom. Left alone with Greg, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. It wasn't often that he revealed his identity during visits like this. Usually, he preferred to blend in, observing operations without drawing attention to himself. But today Greg's behavior had crossed a line and Marcus knew it needed to be addressed immediately. As they waited in silence, Greg fidgeted nervously, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He glanced around the showroom, hoping, against hope, that someone would come to his rescue. But the few other employees present avoided eye contact, sensing that this was not a situation they wanted to involve themselves in. Finally, Lisa returned with Eric, the dealership's manager. Eric was a wiry man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and a perpetually harried expression. When he saw Marcus standing beside Greg, his eyes widened in alarm. Like Lisa, he vaguely recognized Marcus from corporate meetings but hadn't expected to see him in person, at least not under these circumstances. "Mr. Johnson," Eric began, his voice tinged with anxiety. I had no idea you were visiting today. Is everything all right?" Marcus gave him a tight smile. "Not exactly," he replied. "Your salesperson here has been less than professional in his dealings with me." Eric's gaze darted between Marcus and Greg, his mind racing to piece together what had happened. "I see," he said cautiously. "Perhaps we could discuss this in private." "There's no need for privacy," Marcus said firmly. "What happened here isn't just between us, it reflects on your entire team. So let's talk about it now, in front of everyone." Eric swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly. "Very well," he said, turning to Greg. "Care to explain yourself?" Greg opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly at a loss for words. Marcus stepped in, summarizing the encounter in crisp, clinical detail. As he spoke, Eric's face grew progressively paler, while Greg looked like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. When Marcus finished, Eric turned to him, his voice heavy with apology. "I can't express how sorry I am for this," he said earnestly. "This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable, and I assure you it won't happen again." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology but not letting Eric or Greg off the hook just yet. "Good," he said, "because actions speak louder than words. Let's make sure this serves as a lesson for everyone involved." With that, Marcus handed the situation over to Eric, trusting him to handle it appropriately. As he walked away, heading toward the exit, he couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. The air in the small office felt heavy, almost suffocating. Eric, the dealership manager, sat across from Marcus at a plain wooden conference table, his hands clasped tightly together as if trying to hold himself steady. Lisa lingered near the doorway, unsure whether to stay or leave. Her presence seemed to anchor the moment, keeping it grounded despite the rising tension. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable, but undeniably commanding. He didn't raise his voice or make dramatic gestures. Instead, he let the weight of his words do the work for him. "Let me be clear," he said, his tone firm, yet measured. What happened out there wasn't just unprofessional, it was disrespectful. And it reflects poorly on this entire dealership. Eric nodded vigorously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I completely agree, Mr. Johnson, he stammered. We take customer service very seriously here, and what Greg did, well, it's unacceptable. I promise you we'll address this immediately. Marcus raised an eyebrow, studying Eric carefully. You'll address it? How exactly? Eric hesitated, caught off guard by the direct question. His eyes darted toward Lisa briefly before returning to Marcus. Well, first, I'll have a serious talk with Greg about his behavior. Maybe some additional training on how to interact with customers properly. We can also review our policies to ensure something like this doesn't happen again. Marcus listened patiently, his gaze unwavering. When Eric finished speaking, he leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. That's a start, he said, his voice low but clear. But it's not enough. This isn't just about one bad employee. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels respected and valued, whether they're buying a car or simply walking through the door. Eric swallowed hard, nodding again. Of course, he said quickly. We'll implement stricter guidelines and maybe even bring in consultants to help us improve. Whatever it takes. Lisa shifted uncomfortably where she stood, her fingers gripping the edge of her clipboard. She admired Marcus's composure and the way he handled the situation without losing his temper. At the same time, she couldn't help feeling sorry for Greg, whose career now hung in the balance. While his actions had been wrong, she wondered if firing him outright would solve anything, or if it might only create more problems down the line. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus turned his attention to her. Lisa, he said, his voice softer now but still authoritative. Do you think your team understands the importance of treating every customer fairly? Caught off guard, Lisa blinked rapidly before responding. I think so, she said, cautiously. Most of us try our best, but sometimes mistakes happen. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging her honesty. Mistakes are part of being human, he said. But when those mistakes turn into patterns, when people feel excluded or judged based on their appearance, it becomes a systemic issue. That's what we need to fix. Eric nodded emphatically, eager to show his support. Absolutely, he agreed. We'll get started right away. Training sessions, workshops, whatever it takes. Marcus gave him a small, approving smile. Good, he said, because I'll be keeping an eye on things moving forward. If I hear about any similar incidents, I won't hesitate to take action. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Eric paled slightly, understanding the gravity of the situation. Understood, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You won't regret giving us another chance, Mr. Johnson. With that, Marcus stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. Eric scrambled to his feet, extending a hand toward Marcus. After a brief pause, Marcus shook it firmly, maintaining eye contact. Make sure you follow through, he said simply. I will, Eric promised, his voice tinged with desperation. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. As Marcus walked out of the office, Lisa followed him quietly, unsure of what to say. When they reached the showroom, she finally spoke up. Mr. Johnson, she began hesitantly. I just wanted to thank you for handling this so professionally. It means a lot to see someone stand up for what's right. Marcus stopped and turned to face her, his expression softening slightly. It's not about standing up for myself, he said. It's about setting an example for everyone who walks through these doors. People deserve to be treated with dignity and respect no matter who they are. Lisa nodded, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I know, she admitted, and I'm sorry if we've ever fallen short of that standard. I'll do everything I can to help make things better around here. Marcus smiled faintly, appreciating her sincerity. That's all anyone can ask for, he said. Then after a moment's pause, he added, Keep an eye on Greg. He's going to need guidance if he wants to learn from this experience. With that, Marcus turned and headed toward the exit, leaving Lisa standing alone in the middle of the showroom. She watched him go, a mix of admiration and determination swirling in her mind. For the first time in a long while, she felt inspired to push for change, not just for herself, but for everyone who worked at Apex Motors. Back in the Yusang office, Eric slumped into his chair, his head in his hands. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He knew he had two choices: either fire Greg immediately and risk losing morale among the rest of the staff, or give him a second chance and hope he learned from his mistakes. Neither option seemed ideal, but Eric understood that doing nothing was no longer an option. After several minutes of deliberation, he picked up the phone and dialed Greg's extension. "Come to my office," he said tersely. "We need to talk." Greg arrived moments later, his face pale and his hands trembling. He looked like a man walking to his execution, fully aware of the consequences awaiting him. Eric gestured for him to sit, then took a deep breath before launching into the conversation. "Greg," he began, choosing his words carefully. "What happened today? It's serious. You disrespected a customer, a very important one, and that's not something we can overlook." Greg opened his mouth to speak, but Eric held up a hand to silence him. "Let me finish," he said firmly. "Mr. Johnson made it clear that he expects accountability. And frankly, so do I. Your behavior was unacceptable, and it puts the entire dealership at risk." Greg's shoulders sagged, his eyes filling with tears. "I know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I messed up. I was rude and dismissive, and I shouldn't have assumed things about him. But I swear I didn't mean to offend anyone." Eric studied him closely, searching for sincerity in his words. Finally, he sighed deeply. "Look, I believe you're sorry," he said, "but apologies aren't enough. From now on, you'll undergo mandatory sensitivity training, and I'll be monitoring your interactions with customers closely. One slip-up, Greg, one single incident like this, and you're gone. Do you understand?" Greg nodded vigorously, relief washing over him. "Yes, sir," he said. "Thank you for giving me another chance. I won't let you down." Eric dismissed him with a wave of his hand, feeling both drained and hopeful. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that change was necessary, not just for Greg, but for the entire dealership. Meanwhile, in the showroom, Lisa returned to her duties with renewed purpose. She approached the young couple Greg had been helping earlier, offering them assistance with genuine warmth and enthusiasm. As she guided them through the selection process, she couldn't help but reflect on the events of the day. Marcus's visit had been unexpected, but it served as a wake-up call, a reminder that leadership wasn't just about selling cars. It was about building trust, fostering inclusivity, and treating others with kindness. Lisa vowed to carry that lesson with her, using it to inspire positive change in everything she did. Outside, Marcus climbed into his sleek black luxury sedan, glancing at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He allowed himself a small smile, satisfied with how the day had unfolded. Justice had been served, and perhaps Greg would emerge from this experience a better person. More importantly, Marcus hoped his actions would send a message, not just to Apex Motors, but to anyone who doubted the power of accountability and empathy. As he drove away, the city skyline stretching out before him, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Change often started small, with a single moment of courage or conviction. Today, he'd chosen to stand up for what was right, and in doing so, he'd planted the seeds for a brighter, more inclusive future. Greg sat in the uncomfortable office chair, his hands clasped tightly together as if trying to hold himself together. Eric, seated across from him at the cluttered desk, leaned forward, his expression stern and unyielding. The silence between them stretched on heavy and suffocating until finally Eric broke it. "Greg," he began, his voice low but firm, "you know why we're here? What you did today wasn't just a mistake. It was a violation of everything this dealership stands for." Greg winced at the words, his gaze dropping to the floor. He knew Eric was right, but hearing it said aloud made it feel even worse. "I know," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I messed up. I don't know what else to say." Eric sighed deeply, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off an impending headache. "Look, Greg, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. You disrespected a customer, a very important one, and that's not something we can ignore." Mr. Johnson made it clear that he expects accountability, and frankly, so do I. Greg nodded slowly, his throat dry. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he hadn't meant any harm, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply stared at his hands, feeling smaller and more powerless with each passing second. "Eric," continued, his tone softening slightly but still resolute, "you've been working here for years, Greg. You know how things operate, and you know how important it is to treat every customer with respect. But today, you let your assumptions get the better of you, and because of that, you put this entire dealership at risk." Greg swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on being good at his job, at reading people and figuring out what they wanted. But now, he realized how wrong he had been. His assumptions about Marcus weren't just unfair, they were damaging. They had cost him the trust of his manager, his co-workers, and most importantly, the customer he had mocked. "I'm sorry," Greg said finally, his voice trembling. "I really am. I never meant to offend anyone. I was just... I don't know. I thought he wasn't serious. I thought he was wasting my time." Eric raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by the excuse. "That's exactly the problem," he said sharply. "You judged him before giving him a chance. You assumed you knew better than him, and that's not okay. It doesn't matter if someone walks in wearing a suit or jeans, driving a beat-up car or a luxury SUV. Every person who steps through those doors deserves the same level of respect." Greg nodded again, tears welling up in his eyes. He felt ashamed, not just of his actions, but of the fact that he hadn't even realized how wrong he was until it was too late. "What happens now?" he asked quietly, dreading the answer. Eric hesitated, weighing his options carefully. Firing Greg would send a strong message, but it might also alienate the rest of the staff and create resentment. On the other hand, giving him another chance without consequences could undermine Eric's authority and make it seem like bad behavior was acceptable. After a long pause, Eric spoke. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice firm once again. "You're going to attend mandatory sensitivity training sessions starting next week. These aren't optional, they're required. If you miss even one session, you're done, understand?" Greg nodded quickly, relief washing over him. "Yes, sir," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes." "That's not all," Eric added, holding up a hand to stop Greg from interrupting. "From now on, I'll be monitoring your interactions with customers closely. Any hint of disrespect? Any sign that you're slipping back into old habits, and you're out. No second chances after this." Greg's heart sank, but he understood. He had pushed his luck too far, and now he had to face the consequences. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I won't let you down." Eric dismissed him with a wave of his hand, clearly exhausted from the conversation. As Greg left the office, he felt a mix of emotions: relief that he still had a job, shame for his behavior, and determination to change. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to try. Meanwhile, Lisa stood near the showroom entrance watching as Greg walked past her. His shoulders were slumped, his usual confidence replaced by a defeated posture. She felt a pang of sympathy for him, knowing how humbling the experience must have been. At the same time, she couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. Greg had crossed a line, and now he was paying the price. Later that afternoon, Lisa approached Eric in his office. "Do you think Greg will actually change?" she asked cautiously. Eric looked up from his paperwork, considering the question. "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know that we can't afford to lose focus on what's important here. This isn't just about Greg, it's about making sure everyone understands the value of treating others with respect." Lisa nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. "I think it's a good start," she said, "but maybe we should go further. Maybe we could organize team-building activities or workshops to bring everyone together. Something to remind us why we're here. To serve our customers, not judge them." Eric smiled faintly, impressed by her initiative. "That's a great idea," he said. Why don't you take the lead on that? See what you can come up with, and we'll discuss it at the next staff meeting. Lisa beamed, grateful for the opportunity to contribute. I'll get started right away, she promised. As the day drew to a close, the atmosphere in the dealership shifted subtly. Employees moved about their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose, aware that changes were coming. Some were nervous, unsure of what to expect, while others welcomed the opportunity to grow and improve. Back in his own office, Marcus reflected on the events of the day. He had achieved what he set out to do, not just holding Greg accountable, but sparking a broader conversation about respect and inclusivity. Still, he knew there was more work to be done. Change didn't happen overnight, and it required constant effort and commitment. Before leaving for the day, Marcus sent an email to Eric, outlining his expectations for the dealership moving forward. He emphasized the importance of regular training, sessions, open communication, and creating a welcoming environment for all customers. He ended the message with a simple yet powerful statement. Our success depends not just on the cars we sell, but on the relationships we build. As Marcus drove home that evening, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The day had been challenging, but it had also been rewarding. He had stood up for what was right, held someone accountable for their actions, and inspired others to strive for better. In the days that followed, the dealership began implementing the changes Marcus had suggested. Training sessions were scheduled, workshops organized, and feedback encouraged. Slowly but surely, the culture began to shift. Employees learned to check their assumptions at the door and approach every customer with openness and respect. For Greg, the road ahead was difficult. Sensitivity training forced him to confront his biases and reflect on his behavior. At times, he felt defensive and frustrated, but he also began to see things from a different perspective. He realized that his assumptions weren't just harmful to others, they were limiting him as well. One afternoon, during a particularly eye-opening session, Greg found himself sitting next to Lisa. She glanced at him briefly, then offered a small smile. "How's it going?" she asked softly. Greg shrugged, unsure of how to respond. "It's hard," he admitted. "But I guess that's kind of the point, right?" Lisa nodded, her smile widening slightly. "Yeah," she said. "Change usually is." Greg returned her smile, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in days. Maybe he couldn't undo the damage he had caused, but he could learn from it. And maybe, just maybe, he could become a better version of himself. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city. Inside the dealership, the seeds of change had been planted. It would take time for them to grow, but with patience and perseverance, they would eventually blossom into something meaningful. Weeks passed, and the changes at Apex Motors began to take root. Marcus had returned to the dealership several times, not as a customer this time, but as a leader determined to ensure that the lessons learned from his earlier visit weren't forgotten. He held meetings with Eric, Lisa, and other key members of the team, discussing ways to foster a more inclusive and respectful environment. Slowly but surely, the culture within the dealership started to shift. One evening, just as the sun was beginning to set, Marcus called everyone together in the showroom for an impromptu gathering. Employees filed in from various parts of the building, curious about why they'd been summoned. Some looked nervous, wondering if another issue had arisen, while others seemed eager to hear what Marcus had to say. As the last few stragglers joined the group, Marcus stepped forward, standing in front of a gleaming luxury sedan that caught the fading sunlight. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, his voice calm but commanding. "I know you've been working hard these past few weeks to implement new policies and improve the way we interact with our customers. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge your efforts and to remind you why this work matters." The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to him. Even Greg, who had been hesitant to attend, stood quietly near the back, listening intently. Marcus scanned the faces before him, noting the mix of emotions, hope, uncertainty, determination, and felt a surge of pride. These were people willing to grow, to learn, and to do better. When I walked into this showroom a few weeks ago, Marcus continued, I wasn't just looking for a car. I was testing something far more important. How we treat people, not just the wealthy ones or the ones who seem serious about buying, but everyone. Every single person who steps through those doors deserves respect, regardless of how they look, what they wear, or where they come from. He paused, letting his words sink in. Across the room, Lisa nodded slightly, her eyes meeting his briefly. She had played a big role in organizing the recent workshops and training sessions, and Marcus knew she shared his vision for a better workplace. I'll admit, Marcus went on, when I revealed who I was, it wasn't just to hold someone accountable. It was to show you that assumptions can be dangerous. They limit us, blind us to opportunities, and hurt the very people we're supposed to serve. But here's the good news. Assumptions aren't permanent. We can unlearn them. We can choose to see people for who they truly are. Greg shifted uncomfortably where he stood, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He couldn't help but feel that Marcus's words were directed at him, even though he knew the message was meant for everyone. Still, he appreciated the fact that Marcus wasn't singling him out. Instead, he was offering guidance not just to Greg, but to the entire team. To help us move forward, Marcus said, gesturing toward Lisa, we'll continue holding regular training sessions and workshops. These aren't punishments. They're tools to help us grow. They're reminders that empathy and professionalism aren't optional. They're essential. Lisa stepped forward then, holding up a clipboard. We've also introduced a feedback system, she explained, her voice bright and enthusiastic. Customers will now have the opportunity to share their experiences anonymously after each visit. This will give us valuable insights into areas where we can improve. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Employees liked the idea of having concrete feedback to guide their efforts. It made the process feel less abstract and more actionable. Marcus smiled faintly, pleased with the positive response. Finally, he said, raising his voice slightly to regain everyone's attention, I want to emphasize the importance of teamwork. None of us succeeds alone. Whether you're helping a customer find the perfect car or supporting your coworkers during busy days, every action matters. Together, we create the experience that defines this dealership. As he spoke, Marcus noticed Greg inching closer to the front of the group. For the first time in weeks, the man looked less defeated and more engaged. His expression was thoughtful, almost hopeful, as if he finally understood the bigger picture. When Marcus finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Employees exchanged smiles and nods, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Even Greg clapped, along, albeit hesitantly, moved by the sincerity of Marcus's words. After the meeting, Lisa approached Marcus, her clipboard tucked under one arm. That was incredible, she said, beaming. You really inspired them. Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. It's not about me, he replied. It's about all of you. You're the ones doing the hard work. The real change starts with you. Lisa grinned, clearly energized by the compliment. Well, whatever it is, it's working. People are talking about it, sharing ideas, and actually looking forward to the next workshop. It's like we're becoming a family. Marcus nodded, approvingly. That's exactly what I hoped for, he said. A family doesn't just tolerate differences, it celebrates them. And when we embrace diversity, we become stronger. As the employees dispersed, heading home for the evening, Greg lingered near the entrance, watching as Marcus prepared to leave. Summoning his courage, he approached the CEO, his hands still buried in his pockets. Mr. Johnson, Greg said, hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned to face him, his expression neutral but attentive. Yes? I just wanted to say thank you, Greg stammered, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. For giving me another chance. I know I messed up, and I'm still learning, but I promise I'm trying. Marcus studied him for a moment, then offered a small, genuine smile. I believe you, he said simply. And that's all anyone can ask for, to try. Greg nodded, relief washing over him. I won't let you down, he vowed, his voice steadier now. "I'll keep working on myself, on being better. That's all any of us can do," Marcus replied. "Keep going, Greg. You're on the right path." With that, Marcus turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Greg standing there, a mixture of gratitude and resolve settling over him. For the first time in a long while, Greg felt like he had a purpose, a reason to push forward and prove himself. Over the following weeks, the dealership thrived. Sales numbers improved, customer satisfaction ratings soared, and the staff worked together more cohesively than ever before. Employees who had once kept to themselves now collaborated openly, sharing tips and strategies to enhance the customer experience. Even Greg, despite his initial struggles, found himself growing more confident in his interactions. He no longer relied on snap judgments or assumptions. Instead, he took the time to listen, to understand, and to connect. Lisa became an integral part of the transformation, often leading discussions and brainstorming sessions with her colleagues. Her leadership skills blossomed, earning her recognition not just from Eric but from Marcus himself. One afternoon, as she reviewed feedback forms in her office, Marcus stopped by to check in. "You've done amazing work," he told her, leaning against the doorframe. "I couldn't have asked for a better partner in this journey." Lisa blushed, flustered by the praise. "I didn't do it alone," she insisted. "Everyone pitched in. It's been a team effort." "Exactly," Marcus said, smiling. "That's what makes it so powerful. When people come together with a shared goal, anything is possible." As the months rolled on, Apex Motors became known not just for its high-quality vehicles but for its exceptional customer service. Word spread quickly about the dealership's commitment to inclusivity and respect, drawing in buyers from all walks of life. Marcus watched with quiet pride as his vision came to life, transforming not just the business but the lives of those who worked within it. Even Greg found redemption in unexpected ways. After completing his sensitivity training, he volunteered to mentor newer employees, sharing the lessons he had learned and encouraging them to approach their roles with empathy and integrity. Though he still carried the weight of his past mistakes, he no longer let them define him. Instead, he used them as motivation to be better, for himself, for his co-workers, and for the customers who trusted him. On a crisp autumn morning, Marcus stood outside the dealership, watching as employees greeted customers with warm smiles and genuine enthusiasm. The air buzzed with energy, a testament to the hard work and dedication that had brought them this far. As he climbed into his car and drove away, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but it was worth it. By holding people accountable, fostering understanding, and leading with compassion, Marcus had proven that even the smallest actions could spark monumental transformations. And as the city skyline stretched out before him, bathed in the golden light of dawn, he felt a profound sense of hope for the future of Apex Motors and for the countless lives it would touch along the way. Months had passed since Marcus first walked into Apex Motors as an unassuming customer, only to reveal himself as its owner. The changes he had set in motion continued to ripple through the dealership, touching every corner of its operations. What started as a confrontation between Greg and Marcus had evolved into something much bigger, a movement toward inclusivity, respect, and excellence. The transformation wasn't just visible in the way employees treated customers. It was evident in how they treated each other. Gone were the days when cliques formed among staff members or when tension simmered beneath the surface. Now, laughter filled the showroom, teamwork flourished, and collaboration became second nature. Even small gestures, like holding the door open for a coworker or offering help during busy shifts, had become part of the dealership's culture. One crisp winter morning, Marcus returned to the dealership, this time without any hidden agendas. He simply wanted to see how things were progressing. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by Lisa, who looked more confident than ever before. Her promotion to assistant manager had been well-deserved, and under her leadership, the team had embraced the values Marcus had championed. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," Lisa said brightly, extending her hand. It's great to see you again. Marcus shook her hand firmly, smiling. Morning, Lisa. How are things going? Better than ever, she replied, gesturing around the showroom. Take a look for yourself. Marcus did just that, taking in the bustling scene before him. Customers browsed the rows of cars, guided by friendly salespeople who listened attentively to their needs. Near the front desk, Greg stood talking to a young couple, his demeanor calm and professional. It was hard to believe this was the same man who had once mocked Marcus so openly. He's really turned things around, Lisa said, noticing where Marcus's gaze had landed. Greg's been mentoring new hires and leading training sessions. He even volunteers to handle difficult cases now. Marcus nodded approvingly. I'm glad to hear it, he said. Everyone deserves a chance to grow. Lisa smiled, clearly, proud of the progress they'd made together. We couldn't have done it without your guidance, she admitted. You showed us what accountability looks like and why it matters. It's not about me, Marcus replied modestly. It's about all of you. You're the ones making the difference every day. As they walked through the showroom, Marcus noticed subtle changes that reflected the dealership's new ethos. Posters on the walls promoted messages of inclusivity and respect, while feedback forms were prominently displayed at the front desk. Employees wore badges featuring quotes like, "Empathy builds trust," and "Every voice matters." Near the back of the showroom, Eric approached them, looking more relaxed than Marcus had ever seen him. "Mr. Johnson," Eric said, extending his hand. "Welcome back. I hope everything meets your expectations." "It exceeds them," Marcus assured him, shaking his hand warmly. "You've done an incredible job steering this ship." Eric chuckled, glancing around the room. "Honestly, it's been a team effort. Everyone's bought into the vision. You gave us something to strive for, and we ran with it." Marcus felt a swell of pride as he looked around the showroom. This wasn't just a successful business anymore. It was a community built on shared values and mutual respect. And yet, he knew the journey wasn't over. Maintaining such a culture would require constant vigilance and effort. Later that afternoon, Marcus gathered the team for one final meeting. Employees filed in eagerly, curious about what he might say. When everyone was seated, Marcus took a deep breath and began. "When I first came here months ago," he said, his voice steady and sincere, "I challenged all of you to rethink the way you approach your work, not just selling cars but connecting with people. Today I want to thank you for rising to that challenge." Applause broke out across the room, but Marcus held up a hand to quiet them. "This isn't the end," he continued. "In fact, it's just the beginning. Building a culture of respect and inclusivity isn't a one-time goal. It's an ongoing commitment. There will always be room to improve, to learn, and to grow." He paused, letting his words sink in. Across the room, Greg sat quietly, nodding along. Though he still carried the weight of his past mistakes, he no longer let them define him. Instead, he used them as fuel to keep pushing forward, to prove that change was possible. "To ensure we stay on track," Marcus went on, "we'll continue holding regular workshops and feedback sessions. But beyond that, I encourage each of you to hold yourselves and each other accountable. Speak up when something doesn't feel right. Celebrate successes big and small, and never stop striving to be better." Lisa leaned forward slightly, her eyes shining with determination. "We won't let you down," she promised. "This is our home now, and we'll take care of it." Marcus smiled, moved by her words. "That's all I ask," he said. "Because when we lift each other up, we all succeed." As the meeting drew to a close, employees lingered, chatting excitedly about the future. Some congratulated Greg on his recent achievements, while others thanked Lisa for her leadership. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, proof that the changes had taken root in meaningful ways. Before leaving, Marcus stopped by Greg's desk. The salesman looked up, surprised to see him. "Can I help you with something, Mr. Johnson?" he asked. Marcus shook his head. "Just wanted to check in," he said. "How are you doing?" Greg hesitated, then offered a small, genuine smile. "I'm good," he admitted. "Better than I've been in a long time, actually." Thanks to you and everyone else here, I finally feel like I belong. Marcus placed a hand on Greg's shoulder, his expression warm. You earned it, he said simply. Keep going. With that, Marcus turned and headed toward the exit. As he stepped outside, he paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the bustling dealership. Cars gleamed in the sunlight, customers chatted happily, and employees moved about with purpose. It was a far cry from the tense, divided atmosphere he'd encountered months earlier. Driving away, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the countless lives touched by the changes at Apex Motors, not just employees and customers, but families, friends, and communities. By fostering a culture of respect and empathy, the dealership had become more than just a place to buy cars. It had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the smallest actions could spark monumental transformations. Back at the dealership, life went on. Employees continued to serve customers with kindness and professionalism, knowing that their efforts mattered. Lisa led by example, inspiring her coworkers to embrace challenges and celebrate victories. And Greg? He kept learning, growing, and proving that redemption was always within reach. Months later, Apex Motors received an award for excellence in customer service, a testament to the hard work and dedication of its team. At the ceremony, Marcus stood beside Lisa and Eric, watching as the crowd erupted into applause. For a moment, he allowed himself to bask in the glow of their success. Then, turning to his colleagues, he raised his glass in a silent toast. To the future, he said softly.